All right, y'all. How's it going? We out here and just waking up a little bit later than usual, but still, getting my prayer on, getting my devotional on, and I'm reading through Genesis. Shout out to Genesis at Andrews. I'm helping out as one of the teaching pastors there. And so, I'm going through Genesis in my study, and it's been refreshing to say the least. Just going through and seeing these little details and things that I maybe hadn't picked up on or am getting refreshed on. But anyways, I try to keep this brief and not too extended. Right now, I'm reading through Genesis chapter 15. And in my Bible, the title of the heading is God's Covenant with Abram. And, I read down through the first 5-6 verses, and I get to verse 7, and it says this: Then he, the Lord, said to him, Abram, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. And because of the Bible study that we've been doing with Genesis and kind of the flow that it's been there, one of the first things that popped into my mind was, wait a second, that sounds really familiar. It reflected exactly what we saw in Exodus with the 10 Commandments being given to Israel at Mount Sinai. And really what it kind of summed up for me was that God gives us qualifiers beforehand when he's given us promises. So in Genesis 15:7, we see this. God is telling Abram, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans. There's the qualifier. For what reason? To give you this land to inherit it. And this verse is actually popping up right after this promise that God has given Abram, that you're going to have a child and that your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars, which for Abram is pretty impossible because of the situation that he and his wife are in terms of their advanced age, right? So God is sitting here actually qualifying the impossible of a child by saying, look what else I've done for you. These things from this point back here are part of the reason, if not the reason, that you can trust me to do this other thing now. And, Abram's story is only a few chapters back. I mean, he's mentioned in the end of chapter 11. So only a few chapters worth of Abram's experience, and we can see some of the impossible things that God has already done for Abram. And those would include things like Abram getting out of Egypt unscathed. He had the situation where he goes in and he tells his wife, because she was pretty, he's like, hey, tell them you're my sister so that they don't kill me and try to take you as a wife. And Pharaoh sniffs it out and he's like, hey man, you should have just told me from the jump. That's Pharaoh. Like, lying to Pharaoh normally doesn't go well. You have Joseph and those two dudes with the dreams. Like, Pharaoh didn't like what the man had to say, so dude got killed. Like, that's Pharaoh, and Abram straight up lies to him and gets out of it unscathed. That's pretty amazing. You have this other low-key story I read a couple days ago about, and it's in chapter 14, right? When Lot is captured, there's these kings, 5 kings against 4 kings, and the 4 bigger kings end up defeating the 5 smaller kings. One of those kings of which was the king of Sodom, another was the king of Gomorrah. They got beat, so their lands end up getting ransacked, and the 4 kings come in. Lot, because he was down there in that area nearby those towns, he ends up getting captured by the 4 kings. All the other kings flee to the mountains. And Abram ends up going to take on these 4 kings with 318 trained servants is what it says, which is not a lot to be going up against 4 kings of 4 big towns who just beat 5 kings and their armies. And yet Abram goes in, he divides his 318 up even to smaller groups, and yet they end up coming out victorious. They rescue Lot, they rescue the people, and it ends up becoming such a big deal. Abram's like, well, all the kings are like, hey, we want to give you all this. And Abram's like, no, I'm good. I'm not going to take it because credit where credit is due. God did this. Abram's had a number of incredible, impossible situations that God has already brought him through leading up to this promise. So this pattern, I'm sitting here thinking about it when I'm going through my devotions. It's like, man, it's pretty cool. Like I said, this thing relates to kind of the Mount Sinai, but where else might something like this show up? And I didn't have to really think that far, and I haven't thought all the way through this. Shoot, maybe this is going to be a paper for another time. But, in Noah's story, which is just a few chapters before Abram's story here in Genesis, we have Noah with the flood, which clearly you have Noah being delivered in a pretty spectacular way. I mean, his immediate family is the only survivors. They're in this boat that God told them to build. No one knew anything about rain or anything like that before, and yet the entire earth is covered. Animals walking it. Like this is a pretty spectacular, amazing thing that's happening. And Noah and his family are delivered from this. And then immediately after that, we have Noah receiving the promise of the rainbow and that the world would not be flooded ever again. So you have God qualifying himself to Noah, and then the promise given to Noah and humanity by extension, right? And with Israel, so we have Abram's story here in the middle. And yes, my thoughts are a little all over the place. We're just spitballing this thing. There's no script or anything here. We're just out here. But you have Abram's story in the middle, you have Noah's before it, and you have Israel's afterwards. But in each of these cases, you have God qualifying himself to the people or to the person. You have the impossible things that God is delivering them out of. And then you have this promise or this covenant that God is looking to establish with his people right after that. Exodus 20, the first couple verses that precede what people think is the 10 commandments. It's like, I'm the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the house of bondage. Like that's the qualifier again for Israel as a nation. And you think of the crazy things that they were able to see and just their entire experience, the Red Sea, all of that. God is delivering them from these impossible situations. And now, as the qualifier, he is presenting this covenant promise with his people. Where am I in my notes? So you can kind of boil it down, and we'll take another step of boiling it down here. What God did for Noah, Abram, and Israel in their past laid the framework of trust for the covenant that God would establish between himself and them moving forward. That's the big thing. So if you take out the people and you just boil it down to the principle itself, you have God delivering somebody. You have God pointing out his deliverance to that someone to establish trust and a relationship, and then promising something to that someone that can now be believed because of the established trust and relationship. All right, you have those 3 steps. So for me, when it comes to looking at this from a practical perspective, right, for us in our experiences today, I would say that I think we have opportunities, and maybe more opportunities, to recognize God's deliverance in our lives. And it could be from anything, really. It could be little things, it could be big things. Like, I know for me, thinking of the time where I was swimming in South Carolina and almost drowned, yeah, that's a pretty big one. It could be anything. It could be me graduating high school, and even though I finished my senior year before my junior year and shouldn't have graduated, like, it could be literally anything. And for each of you that see this, you're gonna know what those things are. Any of these situations that you've been in that you didn't think you had a way out of, and yet you made it out. That was probably God delivering you, but not just for the sake of proving who he is or that he's powerful and that he can or anything like that. It's with the intent of promising us something. And that to me is the biggest piece of the thing here. We have these moments that we make it through that we don't expect to. And a lot of times we just brush it off like, oh, well, that was cool. Glad I made it out. But those events that are happening are God's attempts, his efforts to connect with us, his attempts to qualify himself for us, so that way we can trust him and we'll be willing to enter into a relationship with him. But again, that's not his end goal. God wants to promise something. He wants to covenant something to us, something with us that is bigger than what we could ever dream or expect. It goes beyond. It's a huge promise, bigger than anything that we could ever dream of. And he wants to do that for us. But it all starts with him qualifying himself for us. It's interesting. If you think about, take relationships these days, right? There's a lot of qualifying that goes on. You have, let's say it could be a guy or a girl. Someone wants to qualify themselves. So the guy is going to say, well, I do this. The girl says, well, I do this and I'm this and I have this and whatever. You have people qualifying themselves to other people or to the dating market in general, because they're hoping that these things will establish trust and put them in a position to enter into a relationship with someone with the purpose of promising something for the future. Let's say if I come in and say I'm like 6'5", 6'6", I'm not, but it's like I come in talking about things like that. I come in saying, oh, you know, I make 6-7 figures, and then I have all of this, and I'm saying all of these things to try to get someone to believe in me and to trust me that I'm more suitable for a relationship and maybe even procreation, so to speak, right? Because if I'm these things now and I can convince you of that, then it says good things for the potential relationship we could have in the future. So it's kind of like that in a very real sense. But God is doing it not just for his own sake, but more so for us. It's interesting because for all the crazy and impossible and amazing things that God has done for his people throughout the Bible, and that he even does for us, it's less a flex on who he is and what he's capable of. It's more just him trying to get someone's attention to say, hey, this is who I am and this is the resource that's available to you. And I want you to be able to exist where you can take advantage of this. That's why God does the things that he does for us. Yeah. Now, despite all of that, and whether it's in a dating marketplace, relationship transaction, whatever you want to call it, or in the spiritual sense with what God does for us, it just comes down to our choice. It's up to you. It's up to me. That's the only thing. That's the only barrier that's between that. It comes down to you and it comes down to me. It's our choice. And we can look at these things as God trying to connect with us and trying to establish trust and the relationship with us, or a lot of people will look at the situation and say, well, if God was real and if he was really for me and if he really cared about me, these things wouldn't have happened in the first place. And I have a lot of friends who take that route as opposed to the other route. So it's up to you. Like it's really up to you. And it's your prerogative. Like you can look at these things and interpret them and seek to understand it and apply it any way that you want to. It's totally up to you. But I will throw out there that despite the challenges and despite the doubts, despite the criticisms, Noah did experience a pretty awesome deliverance. And as a result of the promise that God gave him, the earth hasn't been destroyed by a flood since. Abram did have a son, and his descendants are as numerous as the stars. Despite the challenges, despite him not believing and trying to go about things his own way, like God still came through on that promise. And Israel, despite their challenges, despite their doubts, they did make it to the promised land and did end up inheriting that land. So at the end of the day, like when it comes to us, our experiences, the things that we go through, the things that God is trying to promise us through our experiences, we might have more opportunity and even evidence, I dare say, to recognize God as someone who really wants to qualify himself for us. We might have more evidence and more reason to be in a trusting relationship with God than we think. And it really comes down to us seeing these things, recognizing them, understanding what's really going on and what God's trying to do in our lives, and then sharing these aspects of our experiences with others, because these are the kinds of stories that help other people to give God a chance and to say, well, wait a second, if God was willing to do something like that for you, then what can he do for me? That's the power of a testimony. And that might be one of the most significant aspects of the Bible that we have. Not just that it's, all right, here are the rules, here's the truth, here's all the stuff you should do, but as a testimony. We have Noah's testimony, we have Abram's testimony, we have the testimony of Israel. What does that tell us about our experience and the testimony that we can have and that we can share with others? I think that might be an even more compelling reason to look at and to embrace what the Bible teaches, because of the testimony and what it says as we look in. Wow, if God did this for them, what can he do for me? And as I become more aware of the things that God is doing for me and share my story, other people start asking the same question, and it just continues to grow. So it's interesting. That's all I got. I didn't even finish reading through Genesis, so I'm going to get back to it before I wrap up here. But hey, we out here. See me looking to the side, it's because I got the live going as well. 2-for-1 special, you know what I'm saying? But if you checked in on it, thanks for checking in. And if not, for those of you who catch up with it later, hope it's a blessing to you. But we out here and we out. Peace.